I'm your host, Katie McBride, an advisor for the LHH International Center for Executive Options, or ICEO. ICEO partners with organizations and executives to provide advisory services and coaching through key executive career transitions or inflection points. In addition to serving as an ICEO advisor, I have a communications consulting firm, a career mentoring business for students, and I chair the board of visitors for the Mike Village School of Business. Prior to these ventures, I spent most of my career at General Motors as a senior executive in communications. Today, I'm really thrilled to be joined by Rebecca Macieira-Kaufmann. Rebecca is a founder of RMK Group, LLC, a director on multiple boards, a strategic advisor, an author of the Fit CEO book, and a keynote speaker. Before creating this impactful portfolio of positions, she was a CEO with broad leadership experience in financial services, most recently at Citi. Please join me in welcoming Rebecca Macieira-Kaufmann. Welcome, Rebecca.
Thank you. It's great to be here, Katie.
Great to see you. So let's just start with the obvious. We're calling this series Reimagining Post-Corporate Careers. So we're highlighting leaders who reach an inflection point in their very successful career journey, and then they pivot to apply their experience and expertise in some really cool ways. In your case, we might call it pivoting to powerful portfolios. You've quickly moved from 25 years of top roles in some of the world's biggest banks to a portfolio of activities that really allow you to make a difference in multiple organizations. And we're really eager to learn from your success. And what we want to do is start with your career story. So why don't you walk us through your journey, especially your leadership roles?
Sure. I was debating how far back to go, but I will just say that in college, I even before college, I was always interested in business. I had many different small businesses when I was growing up, including a jewelry business. I made jewelry. And then I was very interested in international business, very young. And I, in college, joined a club. It was called ICEO, and we enabled summer internships abroad. And I actually worked in France and in Helsinki my summer after my sophomore and my junior year in college. And so those are really the beginning of kind of working internationally and getting work permits. Then in business school, I continued that, and I worked my summer in Hong Kong. So I kept trying to get these international experiences however I could. And when I left business school, I started off, I decided to it'd be nice to work in English, and I moved to London and worked there for 3 years in strategy consulting, which is kind of getting a PhD in business, sort of what I felt like. Yeah. And because you see a lot of different industries, you get a lot of exposure. I then moved into, I really wanted to move into operating businesses. And so I came back here to San Francisco, where I'm from, and moved into a product management role at a small company at the time that was called First Deposit. I was looking for product management roles because it really gave me a P&L exposure, and that's what I wanted. I was very interested in general management and the P&L you get when you manage a product. And so that's the beginning, I would say, of my full-time career. And from there, I moved into Wells Fargo. I stayed at Wells Fargo 13 years. I started in the insurance group in marketing. Then I ended up heading the insurance group. And then I moved into small business lending and to small business cash management. So in each one of those, I would say my theme would be managing larger and larger P&Ls, larger and larger teams. And for me, I really entered it through that product lens. That's probably where I started, in a strategic approach. From Wells, I moved to Citi. I came into Citi as the president of Citibank for California and Nevada. If you think about what I did at Wells, I was on the product development, innovation, distribution, manufacturing side. And when I moved to Citi, I moved into the retail side, very different business. At Wells, I was in small business, and at Citi, running the branches. I had 400 branches, a big part of Citi. So that was really interesting. Did that almost 5 years, 4.5 years. Then moved into the CEO role of a subsidiary. I became the president and CEO of a subsidiary of Citigroup called Banamex USA, which is a cross-border Mexican-American bank. And there we had larger commercial clients, wealth clients, some retail. And then I went on the board of that bank. So I was on that board for the 3 years that I was CEO and president, and then became chairman of that board for 4 years. So I served on that board 7 years. From there, I moved, I remained the chair of that board, but I, for 4 years, became the head of the international bank at Citi, which is in clients in 100 countries. We had teams in about 12 countries, and we had, we really did wealth management for clients around the world who wanted to have their savings and investments in US dollars. So that's been my journey. And I traveled immensely, sometimes 3 weeks a month. And I would say at one point I decided it was just time to be home more and work in my own backyard. I lived on airplanes and spent lots of time in other places, loved it. But it was just time, and that was the transition to RMK Group LLC. And we can talk more about that. But I think you said what were the themes of that leadership journey, and I would say, for me, I've always had a real intentionality, as you hear, like international. I was very interested in that. I've always had an immense passion for people, and that means my work, my team, and my clients, customers. So love visiting teams, love seeing them, being with them, love being with clients. So I really focused on going to where the team members were or where the clients were, which added to my travel. And then I have a very positive attitude, can do, anything's possible. So I think that would be some themes.
Excellent. Well, I mean, the intentionality of starting out so young and living in, working in multiple countries and continents, and then, ending up in your role at Citi in an international role really comes through. But you made that change that you made in 2020, stepping away from that huge leadership role. Can you tell us what led to that? You mentioned your focus on family, but what was that experience like? Had to have been a big change for you.
So as I mentioned, part of my personality is intentionality. I would say for years, even while I was at Wells, I always thought about, will I always work in a large corporation? And I always thought, no. In a funny way, if you'd asked me when I was younger, I always thought I'd run my own business. But I did very well in the large corporations. I think I was kind of surprised by that. And I enjoyed it. And I kept getting great roles. And I kept getting asked to take on new challenges, which I enjoyed. And so, but in the back of my mind, through all of that work, I always thought someday I'm going to work for myself again. And someday, and I didn't know what it'd look like. But I'd say even when I was at Wells, which is I left Wells in 2008, so a long time ago. Even when I was there, a lot of fintech or high-tech boards would reach out to me looking for directors. And both at Wells and at Citi, you really can't serve on an outside board. That's a for-profit board. There's just too many conflicts. And so it was so interesting to talk to those companies and see what they were doing and learn about the boards. And I multiple times did try to get exceptions at Wells and at Citi, but never got them. And so that was probably the seed that said, gee, there are these other things I could do with my skills when I'm not in this environment, that there's a perceived conflict of interest that could be putting anyone at risk in terms of that. So I think that planted the seed. I always was involved in nonprofit boards, so I had lots of board experience. But I think the first seeds were a long time ago about someday I'll do these other things, helping these startup companies, got planted.
Yeah, and so it was clear that you had that intentionality certainly comes through with you, and the fact that you already had some clear plans in place when you left Citi. But one of the things that I picked up from you is that you are open to exploring other things. So what was that exploration process like? Can you kind of walk us through that in terms of the process you took to say what else is out there?
Sure. So I went into the setting up RMK Group LLC with 3 ideas that I'd have a 3-pronged approach. One was directorships of for-profit companies. 2 was advising startup CEOs in this, I call it the soup of the Bay Area. Mm-hmm. And the 3rd one is I always wanted to write the book. It's Fit CEO. I started writing that years ago, I really had half the book written fully and totally outlined before I left. And so I didn't know what all the pieces would be. And so some of the things that I did, when I worked with the ICEO, is I explored what are the other things I could do with my background and expertise. I didn't take any of them on, but they were interesting to learn about. I would say one that came through is the idea of mentoring executives or coaching executives. I didn't really think I would do that, but I'm now part of the EXCO, which does that. And so that's been fun. I've enjoyed that. And I get to really leverage all my years of working and coaching team members to now helping other executives achieve. So I think that's one piece that got added, that I got exposed to through sort of my exploration process. I learned about other things like being an expert witness, looked at that, decided not to do that. You can keep adding to your portfolio, but I decided reading a lot of legal documents and preparing for court cases was not where I would be using my best skill. I really like working with people and interacting. And so some of the other things that we explored when I looked at that, that helped me kind of accelerate the process, I think, of what was not a fit for me. We also looked at, there are some areas where you can guide groups of CEOs through processes and serve more as a facilitator. So decided didn't want to do that either. So I think it's not that you might not do it later, or I might not do it later, but that didn't fit in my first stage. I really stuck with my original plan.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like part of it is determining as much what you don't want to do as what you do. Because based on your background, there's so many different ways that you can contribute. And
sure.
So walking through that process sounds like that was helpful.
Yeah.
Were there, I know one of the things that we had talked about before is just the importance of, as part of that, to determine what your options are, having lots of conversations with people. A lot of people don't like the word networking, so I call them curious conversations, but just getting out there and talking with people about their journey and things like that. So as you think about the process you went through to determine that led you to where you are now, what steps were most valuable to you?
Sure. Well, I decided to structure it and schedule it. Mm-hmm. So again, I had that intention of those three prongs. And so what I did is when I started the business, I dedicated Mondays and Fridays to the book. And I really left those days unscheduled to work with my co-author, and we met on those days, and we worked through. So anything related to the book, I tried to put on those 2 days. Didn't always work, of course. Nothing works perfect, but that was extremely helpful to have blocks of time to write and blocks of time that Lilia and I could get together and work through areas of the book. Then I dedicated Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday to networking. What I called it is I would call people up that I knew, often people I call friends, and I don't call them networks, and say, hey, I'm starting my own business. This is what I'm going to do. Want to let you know, would love any ideas you have. And so I really started reaching out to people. And of course, that just snowballs, right? So if I called VCs, and then they would introduce me to 3 more VCs. And then some people say, oh, you should speak to these attorneys that work with startups. And, oh, you should speak to these recruiters for boards. And so my schedule was I look back on that and I think I was meeting with lots of people, and it was all by Zoom. So it was much easier. And because of COVID, I wasn't driving around or flying around to meet people. And I think people had the time too. Everyone said yes. I didn't really have people say no to meet with me.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm sure you'd help them through the years. And, and I think just based on your background, they probably were helpful to, or welcomed the opportunity to make those introductions for you because, recognizing that there's some things you could do for the people they're introducing them to. So that's all great. Well, you've mentioned a few times your book, Fit CEO. And, as I think about, the board, the advisory role, it's just exhausting just to think about, all that you do now and thinking about your career before. 3 out of 4 weeks a month traveling is not very glamorous. So as I know one of the things you talk about in this book is immediate imperfect lessons. Are there any that you can share, from your book?
Sure.
Or from your experience?
Yeah, so immediate imperfect action is what we call it. So the way the book is set up is that we have 30 chapters. They're in 5 sections. Intentionality is one of them, and self-care is another one, for instance, of sections. And then in each chapter, at the end of the 3 pages on a leadership lesson, we'll have a section on immediate imperfect action or getting into your body to walk. So I would say with this business, when I started it, some of the things that came to me about immediate and imperfect actions is sometimes for me, I would try things out and I had no idea where they would go. So you have to just trust the universe and know that putting it out there is just going to work versus waiting to have the perfect idea that will work. It doesn't work that way. So I spent a lot of time early on saying yes to a lot of meetings, having no idea where they'd go, and saying yes to a lot of organizations that I could, if you will, register my bio with for a board. And I haven't gotten a board from any of those, but I learned a lot from that process of those organizations. And I think you have to start. So the idea about immediate imperfect action is don't get stuck trying to do it with perfection. Just start.
Put yourself out there.
Your foot forward. And so that's the reason why it's immediate imperfect action. Don't think about it. Just get it out there because that's the learning process.
Excellent. Well, I know that you mentioned that one of the things the book does for you is it allows you to mentor at scale. And that's become very gratifying to you. So can you say more about that? I know some companies are sharing the book with their employees as a way of just helping them with health and wellness and things like that. But this concept of mentoring at scale is intriguing.
Yeah, I didn't know that the book would become, again, great example of immediate imperfect. I had this vision of a book I wanted to write. So it came about because I used to speak a lot, both at Wells and at Citi, to large groups of employees or team members, or I would speak at large conferences for small business owners, et cetera. And people would stand in line to talk to me afterwards. I'm like, why are they, who are they standing in line to talk to? Oh, they want to talk to me. And the questions I would get were often about what I would consider life balance or managing it all, or how do you do both, or how do you lead a team and travel and so it was all this sort of how do you walk, chew gum, dance, sing, eat, sleep, all at the same time. And so I always had answers and people enjoyed it and more people would stand in line. And a number of people said to me when I'd answer them, oh, you ought to write a book. And so I asked some of my colleagues, do other people tell you should write a book? And they're like, no. Oh, I took note. And I will tell you, so someone just put up, they wanted to see the book again. So I put on the book. But I will tell you a lot of what came out is then me taking notes of what were people asking me and what was resonating. And then especially when I became a CEO, what was I actually, how did I do it? How did I stay married, see my family, exercise, turn around a business that was in trouble, motivate and inspire a team, work with regulators, and not collapse. And so I think a lot of the questions I got was, how do you keep your energy so high? How do you stay so positive? Where does all that humor come from when we're under so much stress? And so I share in the book some of my tips, like my Alice in Wonderland tips around, if I'm in a really crazy meeting and instead of tearing my hair out, I just think, who shrank the door and where did Alice go and where'd the rabbit go? And just sort of laugh internally so I don't stress out. In the book, we also share a lot about the power of the pause. And so, I could be grilled in board meetings. I was on the hot seat. I'm the CEO. I'm in charge. And instead of just feeling grilled and how do you answer all the questions, sometimes just pausing before answering would give me a chance to reflect and gather my thoughts. And the power of the pause, even in speaking here, just to give us time. So we talk about that, and then you can get even more, you can get larger scale about the power of the pause in terms of breaks at work. And so I think what's been really interesting about mentoring at scale is I've managed teams of 5,000 people, 2,000 people. I can't meet with each individual person. So there I would be doing it through town hall meetings and the culture and the recognition program. But with the book and the companies that have been buying the book, a number of companies have bought thousands of copies to give to all their employees as a gift of wellness and leadership. It's been interesting then people link in with me, some of the employees, and tell me what they think. Someone actually just wrote on my LinkedIn site that the book was given to them in October at a company. It was a professional services firm, and they do a lot of audit and travel and consulting. And that they just picked it up and they said, oh my gosh, this is so perfect. Because people are dealing with right now in this the recession and war and COVID and going back to work or not going back to the office and how to turn off Zoom or stay on Zoom. A lot of burnout questions are coming up, and the book is perfect for that because we talk about how do you keep your energy high. There's a whole chapter on energy management. So I could keep going on, but I'll stop.
No, that's there are so many great insights. And for those who are typing into the chat, when we send a follow-up, we will include information on where you can get the book. But just for everyone, anybody that wants to know now, Rebecca, Amazon, and then your website, right?
Sure. So the book website is FIT, F-I-T, CEO, one word, FIT CEO book. So all in a row, www.fitceobook.com. And yes, Amazon has it, but also Porchlight, lots of small bookshops that you can order from them online if you want to support small bookshops, Barnes and Nobles, so you can get it anywhere, really.
Yeah, fitceo.com. And also for our participants,
it's fitceobook.com.
Fitceobook.com. Good. Thank you. I'm sorry. I appreciate the chat, the questions that are coming in on the chat. Please keep them coming, and also you can submit them on the Q&A. I've got a few more questions that I'm going to lead Rebecca through, but then we're going to open it up to you, and so we really do welcome the questions. So the next question I have for you is, making a shift from, we've talked about it a bit, but from a dedicated role as a CEO, granted you were doing other things as well, but a very strong day job, to this portfolio of really interesting things. It's a different cadence of work and fluctuating opportunities, and probably it's a little bit more like this. So do you have any recommendations for people that are contemplating a change from a corporate role to a selection of really interesting opportunities? Any guidance?
Sure. A lot of recommendations. I'd say one, if you are going to leave corporate America or a large team, I thought long and hard about what I love, and I love managing businesses, solving big problems, constant fires. It's almost addictive, right? And I loved working with my teams and coaching people, and I really enjoyed it. So I had to sit down and I spent time with myself just writing down what will I miss the most and how will I make sure I have enough of that in my next phase.
Sure. Yeah.
So one of the things I knew I would miss is I was in an international business. I was working with international people all the time. I thought if I go over to work for myself, how will I fill that bucket? And I decided I'm part of an organization. I'm part of a couple of organizations that are international. And so I leaned into them more. And interestingly, when I was working, I don't want to say 24/7, but it felt like it. I couldn't really go to their events as much. And so I looked at their things and I realized I'm going to go to more of those events. So I literally just went to Chile with the International Women's Forum. It's a leadership group. And we did that in May. So I really stepped up my engagement with organizations I already belonged to. So that was one of my intentional areas, is that I really thought I would miss some of my international colleagues and international life. And so I wanted to make sure I had that. Interestingly, I have lots of international clients, but we meet on Zoom. So I am dealing with multiple international issues. So that's also
During
in
that
my
simulation. Yeah. Yeah.
I think the other thing I had to think through is what if I made no money for my first year or two? So I thought long and hard about that and saved for years, kind of my next phase dream bucket of money. And so I had financially prepared, I would say, to maybe have no revenue for a while. And the other thing I had not thought about as much, I mean, I knew it, but you don't really know it until you do it, which is no support. Like I started business. I don't have an IT department. I don't have a marketing group. I don't have a website manager. I mean, all that stuff of building your own business. And so I've learned a lot about supporting myself technologically and also being okay that it's imperfect. Even before you and I got on this call, I said, sometimes the phone rings and it might black out my screen or, so it's been really interesting. So you have to be really kind to yourself because all kinds of funny things happen when you don't have an army of invisible, wonderful people supporting you that you did not know. You don't think about.
You take it for granted. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I certainly did too. So that's really great, Rebecca. And kind of as a segue from that, you mentioned, this new going to Chile and, having some travel that you probably could not have done before. Earlier, you talked about having more time with your family. So it's very clear that you've been committed to them and you love traveling. So with your busy life now, and again, the boards and the advising and your books, how has the balance both personally and professionally of your time, how do you manage that? Any lessons from that?
So I would say, again, I've always been really intentional. When my kids were young, I worked at a domestic company, right? I worked in the United States and I tried to be home every night for dinner. And when I did have to travel, I tried to limit it to 1 or 2 nights. So I was home 5 nights a week with the kids and could do homework and put them to bed and do those things. Often I would work after I put them to bed if I needed to. When they got older, I started taking them. Then I allowed myself to accept those roles that were international. And sometimes I could have them travel with me if they had a long break from school. And when they went off to college and they had college breaks, sometimes I'd have them meet me in the countries I was going to go to. So they got to see the world. And so that's been, I think I've included them as much as I could and my husband as well. But at some point, I just got tired of not being home for dinner as much as I'd like to, right? It's just a big part of my life, our family dinner. And so I'm mostly home all the time for family dinners, which I love.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, so it's pretty clear that you are have been very intentional with the decisions you've made and the life you're living now, and your energy certainly comes through. And you've got so many accomplishments with the book and other things. How do you think your path will evolve, Rebecca? What do you think? What might be next for you, or how might you make decisions going forward about what you choose to do and lean into or lean away from?
It's been I feel like I just started, and so I think it will be more of this, right? Speaking, going on boards and meeting with these startup clients. What's happening now is some of my clients are getting ready to IPO, so it'll be a really interesting journey. Sure. Some of the boards I'm on are evolving to get ever more grown up from being a startup. So it's really interesting to move through the startup to grown up phase, and I'm getting to live through that and what that all means, having always worked in those larger, well-structured companies. So I'd say I'm open, and I like, I'm curious what will happen, but I'd say I'm spending my time continuing what you call networking, which I call just meeting with people, never ends. And now I don't have to work at it. It's just constantly happening. Mm-hmm. And, the organizations I belong to also facilitate that. And I go to those events. So even this weekend, I'm going away with IWF for a weekend. So I think, showing up when you're invited to these events and you meet new people, and
it almost happens organically, right? I mean, in terms of, you start planting those seeds and it grows. Right. From there. So,
right.
Good. I think we can probably move into some of the questions from our guests, and we've got a couple in the chat. The first was, how did you determine your value proposition and communicate it concisely? How did you do that?
How did I determine my value proposition for RMK Group?
Maybe not. I'm not. It just the question is, how did you determine it and communicate it concisely? So,
sure. Okay, I'm going to take it for my
maybe from two. Yes, that's fine.
So I sat down and I just wrote down, what do I think I do? And I think I provide insight, action, and results. So one of the things that I believe I bring is an operator's mindset. And having run businesses and worked in businesses for 30 years. And I find that is very unique when I talk to some of these startups as an advisor, is all my operating experience of running businesses. And so I'm not coming in and providing financing advice, if you see what I mean. I'm not going to help them raise money. So I think there's just all kinds of areas you can be an advisor to a startup in, and some of them are very much about how do you raise money, how do you network with the VCs, what should the deck look like. I really come and say, I'm going to help you do a couple of things. I know how to scale large teams. I know how to motivate high performing teams and retain them. And I know how to operate a business, and I understand governance. So if you look at my website for my business, which is the RMK Group LLC website, that's really what I talk about. And that is my value. It didn't take me a long time. I just sat down and wrote down a few things about what do I think my unique approach will be in my business.
And I think that intentionality of your life just kind of comes through. It probably made it easy for you. Next question came from Paul. Any recruiters that specialize in board positions, and how might people find recruiters? And maybe you could speak to just the whole concept of recruiters in general, the role they played, if any.
Sure. I meet with lots of recruiters. When you network, everyone introduces you to recruiters when you say, I'm interested in going on boards. And they tended to introduce me to recruiters who focus on CEO or board placement, and typically in financial services. So you end up meeting highly specialized recruiters. All the big firms, they all have it. And I would meet with everyone, and I would meet with each one. My experience has been that they reach out when they have a specific spec, and they want to put you in a slate of qualified candidates. I have not had a board role come through recruiters, but I've certainly spent a lot of time meeting with them and going on the interviews, and I learn a ton. Some of them I think I've gone through maybe 3 or 4 where I've been one of the finalists. And so it's a pretty extensive process, usually 4, 5, 6 months of interviews. Sometimes I'm in the final 2. So they're all learning to me. And I think that when you start your networking process, people will introduce you to the recruiters that are most applicable to your field on the board or CEO side.
Good. So would it be fair to say, Rebecca, that you would view recruiters as part of the strategy, but not the singular? Like if you just, all you did was spend time with recruiters, it wouldn't necessarily garner you the opportunities that you've had. Is that?
It depends what you're looking for. If you're looking for another role, I would spend more time with recruiters. But for boards, my guess, I think it's like 10 or 20% of board roles are filled by recruiters. It's not the main way board roles are filled.
Yeah, and in our experience, frankly, that's the same with looking for corporate roles. You know, using that group of friends that you have and people that know you and that have seen your work and can speak to you and advocate for you and make those introductions is really important to do. So
right.
So some good questions still flowing in. One of them is from Pam, who finances travel expenses? And I was texting her to just find out a little bit more. And she said, for example, your travel to Chile or when you attend conferences and things like that, those opportunities to extend your group of friends, not network, how do you finance that in your?
I do. I mean, I do it. I do. I mean, if it's a networking, so for instance, when I actually have a client in Chile, so I met with a client. I actually have a couple of clients there. So I make it all, I try to put it all together, go to the conference, meet clients, so I can put it through the business, but it's me. I'm one and the same.
Mhm. Got it. And it's an investment, just like, when you're in a corporate role, you decide where you're going to allocate resources.
Right.
Question from Todd. What are the things that have been most surprising to you since starting RMK Group? Any surprises?
I think probably what's been the most surprising is the yin and yang of I have immense self-confidence and immense track record. And, I can look at my bio and say, why would I ever worry about anything? And then you have those days where you're like, I'm so used to my prior career where I was 24/7 booked and in demand. And all of a sudden my day is blank and I have to fill it. And so that's a really big, I didn't know the surprise of that shift. Of course, you can't know it until you do it. And then I'm used to being with people all the time. So the combination of COVID, working from home, being on Zoom, and working for myself, that was a real shift. And so I did a lot of things, which you'll see in the book when you get the book of, I walked every day. My sister and I went walking every day in COVID. I book lunches outdoors. I make sure that I'm engaging with people, and I leaned into these clubs for the engagement with people. So I have, I'm a member of YPO, I'm a member of IWF, I'm a member of Women Corporate Directors. I'm a member of a number of organizations that have either Zoom educational events or now in-person events. And so I do keep a kind of a set of peers, if you will.
Mm-hmm. So it's really clear you get your energy from being from other people. But in, kind of harkening back to your the pause, do you ever pause? Take a real pause and like just have a day when you just give yourself permission that, you don't have to.
Yeah, I do actually. Last weekend I went camping for 4 days and 5 days and no internet, no Wi-Fi. And I read 2 books and just sit.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay, question from Kim. Curious about your thoughts on building or enhancing business development, particularly selling skills. So many experienced executives who have incredible subject matter expertise, but they struggle when it comes to explaining that value proposition or what they offer in closing a deal for services.
I don't know if I built business development skills. I think is for me, because I love people and I love clients, people pick up on that. And if they want to work with that. So it's an interesting, I meet with a lot of people and I do have people come looking for advisory services. And my experience has been the ones who come and have a set of criteria and they hear about me and get referred to me and they meet with me like with an interview to meet a criteria, those don't actually turn into closed, if you will, agreements. But the ones who hear about me from, say, their venture capitalist or their attorney, and they say, hey, you ought to chat with Rebecca. She's doing this. And they don't have like this set criteria of what they're looking for. They end up much more likely to hire me. One, they're getting a recommendation, and 2, they don't have a preconceived idea. Right. So I think it's the combination of the network is where I'm getting all of my clients. I don't really, that is business development, but the ones where they're coming in with like, they're meeting 12 people, I do get some of those. I think they're just great learning experiences, so I always call back and say, what I'd love to learn, what were you looking for? What was a fit? And most of the time they decide not to do it, or they're going to pause it. You end up learning that just there's this flow and flux and shift that you're unaware of if you don't ask on the other side. Why didn't you go through with it? Oh, we're prioritizing other things now, or we're going to come back. And some do. Some came back to me 9 months later and hired me. I was shocked.
Helpful. And so for our participants, great questions coming in through the chat. If you want to be more anonymous, you certainly can submit a question through the Q&A, which is just really viewed by the panelists and the hosts. One question that we have there is, you've been a great mentor throughout your career, and we've talked about your transition from top executive to a non-corporate portfolio career. What suggestions do you have for people who are maybe not executives, but they're also contemplating change? Is the process the same? Anything different?
I think there's so many different kinds of work out there that would constitute a portfolio. So there are websites now that actually are starting to tailor to this. I don't remember the names of all of them, so I don't know if I can perfectly recommend them, but I get requests to join them. And I go through their process and I think, oh my goodness, I don't even have time. I don't really have time. So I know there's one, it's called Guidepost, that Lee Hecht Harrison actually told me about. I know there's another one that I'm not thinking of the name of, where you can go in and say, I'm an expert on, let's say, systems integration, and you can hire me for 1 to 4 hours as an expert. So you don't have to be an executive, you just have to know a topic. And there are firms that look for people and pay by the hour for experts on topics. There are firms that would like, say, interim finance managers or interim, lots of organizations that do that and would love people to join for their need of 1 or 2 days a week. So I think you can put together a portfolio of being both an expert on something for these organizations that want you by the hour, with, if you, depending on how much time you want to work, with saying I'll be an interim XYZ. So I know some people who they go in and help, say, pre-IPO, and just work on organizing the controls and the finances and getting people audit ready, and what if that's their expertise. Other people come in from a technology side. So I think you can create a portfolio that is of your best and highest use of the things you want to do. I think you're on mute, Katie.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was on mute. I apologize. Had a train go by. We have a great question from Nancy Lee. She says, how do you define who you are? Do you define who you are by what you do professionally? How does being a successful woman CEO define you?
I don't think being a successful woman CEO defines me. Rebecca Macieira-Kaufmann. I'm so many roles. I'm a mother, I'm a daughter, I'm a wife, I'm a girlfriend, I'm a sister, I'm a cousin. So I'm a boss, I'm an employee. I have so many roles. So I'd say, I wouldn't say it defines me, but it's certainly a huge part of who I am and how I live, because I spend that much time at work. I'm an author, I'm a speaker. I don't know, we each have probably 100 hats, right? I'm a student, I'm a dancer, you know.
Yeah, so a multifaceted definition.
I'm a tea fan, I'm always drinking tea. You know, I would say that, characteristics define me. You know, if I were to define myself, I'm super positive and high energy and pretty excited about life. You know.
That's excellent. Another question, you've talked about your how you kind of developed your options and the journey that you were on and reaching out to your friends. Were there any other thought partners along the way that, helped you make the decisions that led you to what you're doing now?
Sure. I engaged with a number of thought partners, one being my thought partner at ICEO at LHH, a woman named Robin. Because I knew someone at LHH for a long time, Peg, and I reached out to her to say, hey, I'm thinking about this. And she said, you ought to really look at our International Center for Executive Options. I mean, what a perfect name. And I thought, great. So that was one of my investments in myself when I started this, because I don't know, I thought it might be a little lonely to set this all up. And so that was great to have someone to call and say, okay, I called it Wobble Days. I'm having a wobble day. And a wobble day to me was like, whoa, how does this all work? And if I went through 8 interviews and was told I was a finalist and then didn't get the board. And she's like, oh yeah, that's super normal, super common. Oh, okay, don't wobble. So I think that was extremely helpful and sort of to accelerate my own ideas. So when I said I wanted to write a book, she helped introduce me to some articles about the different publishing options, and then introduced me to some authors who had used each one of those options: self-publish, go with a big publishing house, hybrid publishing. And so I looked at all that. So I had the book, but I hadn't actually thought through the publishing process. I also have two friends, interestingly, both who have written 5 books. So they also accelerated it by telling me one self-published and the other one used a major publishing house. The self-publisher owned all her content, everything's hers. And the other one, she worked with a big publishing house and they take 60, 70%. There was just different, it was really helpful. So I have an amazing network of people I know, and I don't think about them as authors. They're just my friends. But I realized when I wanted to write my book, I looked at my friends. I had quite a few friends that had written a book. So I reached out to them.
Yeah.
So it's a combination of you can engage it with an ICEO and an LHH and get a partner to help you in conjunction with, again, your network is going to be really helpful, or joining groups. You can join author groups, you can join writing groups. There's even cafes I've read about that you can go in and pay for someone to time you that you write for 2 hours while you drink your coffee. I mean, there's just a lot of support out there for people who get writer's block. I thought that was funny. I love that. I have to try that. Go to a cafe where someone puts a timer and like, you got to write for 2 hours before your next cup of coffee. So
yeah, if you're deadline driven, that's a good thing.
And I joined a co-working space in San Francisco that's very reasonable, and I go there maybe 1 day a week. So and they do things like have 3 o'clock tea, so that all the people, and they put the tea and cookies out, and everyone in the co-working space mingles, and you all shake each other's hand and meet each other, and it's nice.
Yeah, that's great. A couple more good questions in the chat. One is from Lonnie, and she says she's calculated that her total estimated time to work is about 200 days. That leaves time for summer, winter holidays, family, etc. Her question is, did you think about how much you wanted to work and set a goal and guidelines, or are you just going with the flow to see how things go? And then, so that's question one. And then second question, do you have a timeline in terms of when you're going to truly stop? And, if that's ever possible with you.
So I totally wanted more 4-day weekends or 3-day weekends. And so I was very conscious. My calendar, I have paper, but obviously I have it online as well. But in paper, I have it by the week, and I go through and I just block off Fridays or Mondays here and there. So I have more 3-day weekends. And then sometimes I'll go an hour away with my son or my daughter, or like my son and my daughter and I went away for 4 days together. Just some fun family trips. We all went camping, my husband and kids, 5 days. So I try to just every month block a 3 or 4 day weekend so that I don't schedule myself those times. So I know when my board meetings are, that's pretty straightforward. And then I don't book clients on those times that I want to have those longer weekends. So I've been very intentional about making sure I have some fun longer weekends that I can play. And there's so much to do in the Bay Area, right? That's not far, and I can go get some sun. In terms of I'm sure, have different pacing over time. I'm still got a lot of energy right now. And my mother retired at age 85, and I asked her, would she do that again? She goes, I think you should retire at 75. So there you go. Her words of wisdom.
Clearly, you're following in your mother's shoes. Question from Aika. I apologize if I'm not pronouncing the name correctly. This is a great question. You talked about being kind to yourself. What are some recommendations for emotional resilience at the beginning of the journey? You talked about the wobble days. Do you have any suggestions for our guests there?
Sure. And a lot of it is in the book as well, Fit CEO. Mm-hmm. But I do things like schedule time for myself, like to go out and get some sunshine, go for a walk, have lunch out with a friend, call a friend if I'm feeling that wobble, like, ooh. So what would create a wobble is like, I had some days, it was funny, where like everyone would cancel. So my whole day, like, wow, I'd have 5 meetings. They all got canceled. And I hadn't quite figured out my pricing. I'm like, I'm not paid if everyone cancels, so I had to sort of think all that through and move more to a retainer type structure so that I wouldn't like, but when all your networking people also cancel all their appointments. So I'd say lots of things. I now have fun with it, which is, calendar gymnastics. Everything's in flux versus this fixed calendar and all the meetings have to happen. I had to really change my relationship with cancellation. So now when someone cancels, like, free time.
Yep.
What fun, so not to have be, there's some problem in my business, but more, how nice. I have free time. I can read more. I now get to read like the whole newspaper in the morning, which I never had time to read the whole newspaper. So I really enjoy that with a cup of tea. I get a nice tea. So I'd say that's what I mean by being kind to myself. If, if a client doesn't decide to go with me, that's a gift, not a problem. That's being kind versus saying what's wrong. Because, well, that's great. I have more free time. Or that's great, because if it's not a fit, it's not a fit. I don't want to work with someone that there's not that chemistry that we will work together. And it is so energizing to work with people that want to work with you. You get off the call and we're both more energized.
Right.
Being kind to myself has all those levels of acceptance, take a break, take care of myself.
That's wonderful. Great answer. Here's another question that came in. If you could navigate your career again, are there any do-overs or something you would do differently? And what can our guests learn from that?
Sure. No, I don't look back and think I want to change that, because it is the unexpected that often teaches us the most. So I didn't think I would become CEO of a Mexican-American cross-border bank. That wasn't on my intentional plan. I knew I wanted to run businesses, and I was doing that. But I got that phone call on like a Friday afternoon, and they wanted me to start that Monday. I had the weekend to recruit a COO and to bring a team together. I said yes. And I didn't know what I was getting into to fix a troubled bank. If I had known, I might not have signed up. It's a lot of work. But it's probably the best job I ever had,
Creating something out of nothing. Yeah.
Yeah. And the team really comes together in crisis. It's a really bonding experience.
Yeah. I bet you have relationships still from those, and knowing you from all the roles that you've had.
Yeah.
So, we're nearing an hour, and before we wrap things up, Rebecca, is there anything that I should have asked you, or any other any other points you'd like to leave us with?
I think that I would just reiterate that it's the unexpected that often creates some of the greatest opportunity and teaches us. My opportunities have come from LinkedIn. They've come from friends. They've come from me asking for a referral for a friend, and I got into a chat with that person and we connected. So be open to a lot of things. And the other one is join some organizations that match your interests, because the people you meet there will be part of this great fabric or quilt that you're building.
Wonderful. Great way to close. Rebecca, thank you so much for your time and for your insights and for your great book. I have learned a lot from it, and hope that our guests will be able to learn from it as well. And I know they've learned from you. So thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining us, and we will see you at the next webinar.
Thank you so
everyone.
Thank you.